All right, so once again, for probably the 10th or 11th time this year, I put down the phone after a conversation about a fairly big tarot reader and or astrologer or spiritual practitioner with a fairly big channel or Instagram page or content platform going broke and getting ready to fold up their business for good. And I think it's time that we have a little bit of a talk about why so many tarot readers and astrologers are going out of business. And for those of you that might be spiritual content creators, this might be important for you to have a look at if you feel like you might be actually cresting the ledge of a peak and falling over the other side. And for those of you thinking about starting a spiritual business, it'll help you understand exactly what is going on when it comes to the online spiritual world in terms of economy and market. And for the viewership out there, might be rather tantalizing to know what's going on behind the scenes. Something is happening to spiritual workers, and nobody is talking about it. Something is happening to spiritual workers, and nobody is talking about it. Readers, astrologers, practitioners that once had thriving businesses are suddenly making no money because the spiritual economy online and around them is imploding. And it's interesting from my perspective to observe this where I am, because I run my business model in a way that is very different than what is considered mainstream or what has been maybe lofted or lauded over the course of the last couple of years. For those of you who don't know, I've actually been in business here on YouTube since 2013. And for myself, I have kind of always tried to niche myself away from a lot of the bigger spiritual movement pushes and trends and viral content out there, and run my business and run my platform more like a brick and mortar magic shop and store. And in a lot of cases, it's helped me. A lot of cases, yeah, it's caused me to miss out on some growth opportunities, but it's also protected me from what looks like the end of the spiritual bubble in the online spiritual economy world. So we're going to talk a little bit about what is going on and what I've observed, because I have done readings for some of these readers, and some of these readers have just as much, if not more, even in many cases twice or 2.5 times as many followers as me, Instagram and YouTube and TikTok combined. And so there's a lot going on here. This is not intended to be a gossip video, so I'm not going to be naming names, though some of them have been very public about what they've been up to. So, if you know who they are or you can read between the lines, that's your prerogative. But we're not going to be doing it for those purposes. We're not going to be making this about scandal. We're going to be making this about understanding what's going on in the world of, online spirituality, especially its market. So let me start by talking about what everyone thinks is going wrong. Because you'll hear things like, it's the algorithm, the algorithm isn't promoting me, the algorithm's forgotten me, the algorithm has left me floating out in space. Or people might say, we are in a time of a very difficult economy globally or even nationally, depending on what country you're in. And so the economic uncertainty and sketchiness of it all, of course, is leading to low consumer confidence, or maybe the spiritual trend itself is dying and people are burning out on it. Nobody gives a crap anymore. What am I going to do? Now, some of these arguments or some of these hypotheses are true in some cases, though not fully fleshed out in the way a person needs to flesh them out if they're going to understand what is really happening. Some of these may be true, but they're incomplete. These are symptoms. These are not a root cause. These are complications that have arisen from something else, right? Kind of like how pneumonia is a complication that can come up from another illness, What we're talking about when we say the algorithm or the economy or spirituality going away as a trend or it's a slow season or whatever, these are all symptoms, not the root cause. Because I can tell you right now, I started my business here at the bottom of the credit crunch recession in 2013. I can also tell you I made more money in 2022 during the pandemic than I did in 2024. I can also tell you that my ad revenue was higher in 2015 when I had 30% of the followers that I have now. So it's not always a one-to-one relationship. There's something else going on. So we're going to get the obvious out of the way. Why is it that a lot of these content creators and a lot of these readers are going out of business in spite of having maybe high engagement, high following populations, or even some kind of large backing that belies the truth about what is going on with their world behind the scenes? Well, the biggest thing that we could talk about, and probably the most obvious, we'll get it out of the way, is oversaturation. There are far more creators now than demand can support. There are content creators of a spiritual nature as far as the eye can see, right? Real, legitimate spiritual practitioners and readers, real natural-born psychics and practitioners, people who are really serious and educated, all the way over to the other side, to the people just putting out fluff, people just putting out emotional nurture porn, feel-good porn, and everything in between. It's become a situation where millions of tarot accounts, millions of astrology accounts, millions of personal development, self-helpy, fluff porn memes have also created a change in how people view spirituality. The trend itself has actually hurt what it's set out to do. And the low barrier entry has created an overcrowded field. Supply is massively exceeding demand. And what happens with that on a digital level is that it's also confusing things like trend marking, trend checking, as well as also algorithmic placement. The rise of a lot of this as a culture has created a situation where suddenly things that were once seen as a study or a service or a practice or an actual art are simply seen as diversions, entertainment, content, and again, porn. And let's be honest, I'm going to use that word a lot in this because when you turn this all into pornography, it's usually affirmation pornography, right? It's all about making people feel good, giving them a little release by giving them an artificial piece of content. Of course, trust is going to erode. And when trust erodes, the revenue goes. It's transformed the way people see who is actually following and who and what this art is all for. Because I can tell you right now, there is also a huge shift in terms of active, engaged audiences, even from 2020 to 2025, or 2015 to 2020, or 2010 to 2015. Who is showing up, who is attracted, and who wants to be there has changed. Now, a lot of this is because, well, when you change the culture that drastically, through all of the means and methods that I just discussed, you are creating a situation where the spiritual marketplace and the very spiritual community and the very work and art itself is hijacked. So for a lot of people out there, their businesses are failing because their businesses are no longer connecting to or working with or for the people they set out to work with and or for. Or in some cases, again, not going to name names, some businesses were modeled based on the trendiness of it all, right? Just creating content for content's sake. Let's not forget the attractiveness of the notion of ad revenue from YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or anywhere can be very appealing to people who don't have a talent but have the means to create an aesthetic. For people that want to create an image and maybe, again, some pornography, but not necessarily do any real work. Now, I'm not saying that the people I've been talking about or hearing about are guilty of this. Maybe two of them. But what I am saying is that when you get enough of that going on, the audience and the market loses its trust in you, and doesn't want to be associated, what's drawn to that market. When you have the market get hijacked, right? A spiritual space that used to belong to real practitioners and people who really honored the art and people who would take and actually apply the information that they were getting from maybe the teachings or the studies or the content or from the readings and apply it and make changes in the real world. When you transform that, when you change that population out for people that are just treating it like entertainment and a diversion and porn, suddenly you are going to lose revenue, because guess what? It's the population that left that was actually paying for your work. And now we're in a place where a lot of people don't even give personal readings anymore. In fact, a lot of the pimpin' and whoring is about creating this artificial sense of personability and personal connection, even though thousands of people are watching, which, in my opinion, is just the actions of an overt narcissist gassing up a covert narcissist who really wants to believe it's all about them. And over the last few years, this entire space has become so bloated with influencers, marketers, algorithm chasers, aesthetic creators with no spiritual backbone. Well, it all just kind of collapsed. And so a lot of people got tired of the spiritual community. A lot of people got tired of who was attracted, of who was here, of who was putting out the stuff, and who was consuming it. Because it taught people to scroll, not to study, to consume, not to grow, to demand, but not to invest, and to take and not to give. And that blame is on both the creator and the consumer. And so for a lot of people who are going out of business right now, it's because they created something unsustainable. I want to talk a little bit about ad revenue, because a lot of people out there, both content creators, both aspiring content creators, established ones, and even consumers, don't really understand how ad revenue works. You see, there's this myth that started back in the early 2010s, 2010, 2011, back when YouTube partnerships actually had a bit of a threshold you had to cross before you could start, that if you could get X amount of subscribers or X amount of followers, then suddenly your bills would be paid by just simply creating content, and the bids that were made on the ads and commercials that would show up on your content would take care of you. But the truth of the matter is that in order for that to actually be something real and sustainable, you would have to have a following bigger than any astrologer or tarot reader actually has. Because not only has what you get back for your ad revenue gone down exponentially in the last 10 years. I mean, I was making more in ad revenue in 2016 when I had 40% of the following I have now than I am now. But I'm okay because I stay old school, because I offer personal readings, because I want to work with people who take this work and apply it out in life. I don't put myself out there to be putting out feel-good porn. I don't like people who just treat my stuff as sort of a pleasant, happy, fluffy diversion. I don't like the idea of my stuff being relegated to a trailer trash ghetto of low art just because it's entertaining content. And there's no ad revenue that's going to pay all your bills in that anyway. Now, some of these readers and some of these astrologers did think it was going to take care of them until they realized it couldn't. Maybe they started out in a situation where they had another job, or maybe they had a dual income household, but something changed about one of those situations, or they thought maybe eventually they'll get to a place where the ad revenue would take care of itself. They don't have to be personal. They don't have to put any real work. They don't have to roll up their sleeves. Unfortunately, that is bad for them because, well, guess what? The high engagement does not promise a high economy. High engagement never means high economy. And so be careful when you're assuming that. You know, if you're thinking about going out and starting a spiritual business, you don't want to go and follow the example of people that came into this during the spiritual gold rush of 2018 to 2025. People are burnt out on it. And a lot of the people that even got into things like workshops and certification programs and things like that, it's a cliche now. The only way to actually see whether or not a spiritual business is going to make it is to actually see how good that person is at rolling up their sleeves and takes pride in the blood, sweat, and tears of actually doing and providing the real work that they try to pretend to provide with their aesthetic. I think we can actually illustrate this a little bit better if we do a bit of a study of the rise and collapse of the online spiritual marketplace world as it relates to content creation. And I'm going to look at what I've been able to observe from 2013 to 2025 in the present. And if you are a spiritual content creator, or you're struggling, or you're thinking of starting a business, or again, you're just a curious consumer, this could be very illuminating to you, because depending on when you actually came into the online spiritual world, you might have come into an era that you thought was a consistent static norm. But I can tell you, it's actually not. And the vibe and the energetic atmosphere and the economy of this space has changed several times, and we are at the beginning of another change. The good news is it's the change where we're actually looking at seeing a demand for, well, what we've already seen before returned to get away from what's kind of become, again, the kind of trailer park low art ghetto. So let's talk a little bit about what's happening and what's been and where we're going next. I'm going to go back to the early golden era, 2008 to 2014. This was the pioneer time when it comes to things like YouTube and Instagram, right? It was the long form era, and it was also the time where we saw a lot more focus on detail, actionable work, practicality, and also the teaching, implementation, and exploration of deeper esoteric arts, even in what could be seen as more commercially mainstream astrology and tarot. In fact, tarot readers, content creators, and astrologers, they were the ones that were sort of the natural born and or highly invested self-taught. There weren't any focuses on certifications. People were not coming in as beginners and trying to get paid for beginning their journey. They had already known who they were. They figured themselves out. They already had their talent, their skill, and their education down. They were not in it to just sort of stumble intuitively along the way. And guess what? That brought consumer trust, because these were not people that were swept up in any trend looking for reflection or an echo chamber in that trend. These were people who did all their soul searching already. We were people who were already the nerds who did the work and the reading and the heavy lifting, so it was time to create the content and produce the business. And what made that work was, again, consumer trust. And there was no fatigue. Nothing gets more tiring and aggravating than hearing some slutty girl with a vocal fry talking about how this is for you and your twin flame and healing love light resonance blah. 2016 to 2018 is when we saw the aesthetic spirituality boom. Instagram pivoted to a more algorithmic feed, YouTube started pushing for shorter videos, and suddenly everything became a bit more about aesthetic. Memes became more of a standard replacement for real astrology posts, influencers started entering the space, and the spiritual space stopped being a place that you go to immerse yourself in spirituality. Instead, it became a place that a person would go to wade in an echo chamber. It suddenly became less about what sets it in a space of uniqueness and actionable work and an art, and more of a place about belonging, instant community, and the promise of emotional energy and, well, emotional porn. Aesthetic content outperformed educational content, real practitioners losing the early visibility that they had, and everything became trendable. Aesthetic content outperformed educational content, real practitioners losing the early visibility that they had, and everything became trendable. Aesthetic replaced authenticity. And so again, this is where the pimpin' and whorin' really started to show up, 2016 to 2018. 2019, the micro-influencer takeover began, just in time to get ready for the pandemic. This is where we see a lot of algorithmic shifts going on, where the algorithm at that point in time was all about just rewarding engagement for its own sake. So the more noisy you could make your content, the better your content was, right? This is why so many things like rage bait and outrage porn and all of that kind of stuff was really kind of, that's where it really started to kind of take off, 2019. Algorithm not only rewarding bite-sized, low-effort content, but also we see this kind of trickling into the astrology and tarot world, where it's really just kind of more like gossip columns and scandals, pick-a-card readings kind of go crazy, twin flame mythologies start to get all distorted and oversaturated. And we also see this influx of this idea of going through a spiritual awakening, but it's really just kind of being the same train wreck with the new vocabulary. The spiritual community becomes not only overly saturated, but again, trend-driven, visually focused, and flooded with copycats. And suddenly you have a situation where it's people trying to reach more people like themselves as opposed to honor the art. This is really kind of not the beginning, but the first rumbles of actual trust in these arts getting eroded. Once we get to the pandemic years, 2020 to 2022, now we're starting to see things push in such a direction where relatability is such in high demand, a feeling of belonging and connection is such in high demand, that the actual work or actionable effort or the purposes or the intended purposes of any of these spiritual arts gets thrown out the window, and all of a sudden it's a costume party. We see live streaming rise. We see Instagram and YouTube adapt to keep up as best they can. They're falling behind TikTok, though, because TikTok is going through a heyday at that time. Astrologers and tarot readers are making more money than ever if they are strictly doing it for scandal, entertainment, and diversion purposes. Yet at the same time, what we also see is this rise in the celebration of the new, relatable, and let's just be honest, less educated, and the decrying of that and those that are actually taking this in a more serious martial art kind of perspective. The cracks form with that because influencer spirituality goes mainstream, and suddenly the influencer craze and all of the coaching and certification and all of that kind of stuff that everyone was into becomes more about connecting and being seen with or associated with a movement or a thing, and not even paying attention to the depth or substance of what you're talking about. Manifestation culture becomes toxic positive. We see aesthetics overtake depth in an even greater capacity. And suddenly these scammers are multiplying using not only stolen content, but it's almost like the entire spiritual community ended up in the same place as that 90s film Single White Female. Bubble inflates, and of course, as we get to the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, that bubble is beginning to burst. The algorithmic collapse occurs at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, and it's a complete shit show. Instagram deprioritizes photos, YouTube starts to pick up in terms of its shorts, creators start to lose reach overnight, and there is a sudden drop in engagement. Where did the people who had lives to apply this spirituality to go? I'll tell you where they went. Away from the toxic spiritual culture, away from the mass consumerism, away from the pimps and whores. Suddenly it was very hard to actually find what you wanted. The algorithm wasn't letting people find who they wanted to find. If somebody was looking for an actual serious, right, salt of the earth or forged in the fire spiritual practitioner, all they were getting were a bunch of hookers or a bunch of cult leaders. They couldn't actually find anybody that had any real depth or merit. And that is also because a lot of people really just love narcissists. And so the algorithm just kind of put it there. The massive burnout and parasocial pressure of it all started to also bring a celebration of a sort of a pseudo-stalker culture, making it all the more unappealing for a lot of people to actually enjoy this art or even remember how it used to be. It was around 2023, 2024, I started actually trying to really push this notion of I'm old school, reminding people what old school was. And I can tell you right now, it's scary. Because sometimes I'll meet people who don't know what old school is. They don't know the difference between all the shit I've been talking about and what old school is. And so in a way, the pimps and whores kind of won. But not for long. 2024, the crash begins. When we talk about the crash of the spiritual marketplace, everyone is done with retreats. Everyone is done with online workshops. Everyone is done with coaching programs and certification programs. Everyone is done with self-empowerment Barbie. Everyone is done because there is no depth. It even gets to the point where fake tarot reader scammers, sneaking into people's DMs are starting to make them feel violated. 85% of spiritual creators reporting an income drop. We've got every niche getting overcrowded left and right. Everyone and their mother with a webcam is a tarot reader. Everyone and their mother wants to be a Reiki healer. And suddenly the suffering happens to the people that actually do want to get real readings and do want to actually have personal readings, and the people providing them, because guess what? The pimps and whores took up the space. So what happens when the wrong people take up the space that you used to call home? You leave. Your business might be suffering because the people that would actually hold you up are not there. I'll be honest, you cannot look at high engagement and assume that that's going to be a barometer for how many sales you're going to get or how your services are going to go. We already talked about how ad revenue is not going to keep you afloat. And the people who want to use you just because you're on TV or you're on their phone aren't really interested in actually changing their life anyway. You're there to make their life they don't want to change easier because that's how you built your business. Don't want to do that if you've been doing that. The spiritual recession, where we are now, is all about the collapse of trust turning into a collapse of economy and a collapse of revenue and a collapse of health in the spiritual online world. High follower count, zero cash flow, clients ghosting, people working harder than ever and making nothing. And again, you can't say it's all about the economy. I started this at the bottom of the 2013 credit crunch recession. I made more money during the pandemic than I did now. It's all about what is going on with your business. So how do you survive? How do you survive the empty marketplace? Because 2025, everyone's burnt out on spirituality because of what happened to spirituality. I'm okay, but that's because, again, I don't run my business that way. If you are in a situation where you're thinking about closing up shop because you did run your business this way and there's no way out, or you're thinking about starting a business but you were following a bad example, or you are a consumer and you're kind of like, holy shit, I didn't know what was going on. Well, there is a way to start changing things back to the better without having to go back to pimp and whoredom. And the way is start emphasizing personal accountability, personal services, but also healthy boundaries. The problem with this culture, and it's not something I've been silent about for a while, but I thought I would be a lot more sadistically gleeful to hear about people collapsing. But I'm not. It's just, it's a sad I told you so kind of moment I'm having right now. The way to get things back in proper order is to stop trying to turn this into a cash grab. It's one thing to run a business that's successful because it shows in your heart that you care about it, you know who you are, you speak with your own words, and you own your own art and craft. It's another thing to whore it out aesthetically and to try to make everything look like you think the way other people want it to look. It's kind of like in relationships. It's really toxic to be around people who don't know who they are, but they just try to figure out what you want and pretend to be that instead. Well, people don't like that from their content creators either. People don't like that from, healthy people don't like that. The people who will pay, the people who will actually support you, the people that will actually raise you up, the people that will actually give you real feedback you can use aren't like that. And sometimes it's not that the algorithm forgot you. Sometimes it's that the algorithm dropped you in a community that won't give you anything. And sometimes it's not that the algorithm forgot you. Sometimes it's that the algorithm dropped you in a community that won't give you anything, which is very true. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes the algorithm isn't necessarily ignoring you, but it's dropping you in a high engagement, low activity space. It's dropping you in a high engagement, right? In a place where it's, okay, this person's just consuming spiritual content 24 hours a day, boosting the algorithm for everybody that they're consuming, and yet at the same time, drawing those people who don't want that, who do want to run a real business, into a place of poverty. So what do we have to do next? Right? I'm not really going to change anything because, quite frankly, I've kind of missed all of this. But How does somebody like me, in spite of all of that, continue to support themselves? How does somebody like me continue to be okay regardless of what's going on out in that maelstrom? What do you need to do next with your spiritual business, and or if you want to start one? First, let's talk about some practical economic steps. You're going to have to slowly start rebuilding, but from a smaller, more aligned audience. Quality over quantity in what you're putting out there. We are in a place right now where people want authentic. The girl who throws out 60 spiritual terms, or the guy who wants to talk about how he suddenly woke up and knows everything, is a cliche. Not that those were ever really like good people, but the thing that I would say here is you need to find a way to navigate your own voice and use your own voice, because the people that are going to invest in you and support you are not people who are just kind of looking for spiritual content or spiritual porn from anyone. Those people are a dime a dozen, and they will boost your algorithm, they'll boost your engagement, they won't put any money in your bank account, they won't help your business grow. And guess what? Worst of all, because that's not worst of all, but worst of all, you're not making a difference in anybody's life. And the whole point of doing this, in my opinion, is to be able to make a good difference in somebody else's life. You can't make a good difference in the life of somebody who doesn't want to do anything, who's just using this to get through the day. And you can't make a good difference in somebody's life if they can't find you because the algorithm is dropping you in a trash pile. Offer services. Enforce the focus on personal work. I'm not saying make everything that you put out a commercial. I think that's a terrible idea, and that's annoying too. But what you do need to do is, if you have been kind of skating on the hopes that ad revenue or passive income is going to save the day, you're a lazy bitch. And what you need to do instead is think a little bit more about not being a lazy bitch, and think about what you can do to provide something unique and to provide something skilled to help people, but also understand that you have to do that on a personal basis and not just be the Ricky Lake, Maury Povich, Sylvia Brown TV sideshow psychic, healer, or spiritual practitioner, or medium, or whatever you are. Also, share your true character. Show your flaws. Show your bullshit every once in a while. Or show your cringe and your weirdness. Because guess what? I've been doing that a bit more, especially the last 2 years. Some people don't like it. Some people actually really like it and appreciate it. I bring out the anime stuff, I bring out the comic book stuff, I start talking in all kinds of weird fantasy Dungeons and Dragons language, and guess what? The people who actually get personal readings from me, that I can actually work with, that work with me, that are intelligent enough to hold a conversation and form a thought, appreciate what sets me in a space that is unique from other readers. They don't hold it against me. It's only people who don't have a soul who hate you for being unique. But if you are letting yourself actually be unique, as opposed to like the throw a rock, hit 3, look, she's covered in crystals, you're going to actually do better, and you will survive this crash. You will survive this recession. Create an actual demand by actually celebrating and putting out what is unique, not relatable. Choose authenticity over relatability in your work. And for the love of goodness, you have to start creating avenues to get personal with people while also holding the boundaries so that people don't try to enmesh with you. You cannot foster a parasocial connection with people anymore. That is going to kill your business. You should have never done it in the first place, but now you need to stop. Get away from things like paid workshops, get away from things like memberships, get away from things like certification programs. Get your damn boots on the ground. Show people that you actually are a spiritual practitioner, because that's what they deserve to see from you. Somebody that can actually work in their element, and somebody who can prove that they have mastered it, and they deserve to be charging for their services. That's how you win trust back, and that's how you're going to actually help not only your own personal economy, but maybe even stop and reverse this spiritual recession. Because people like me are going to be okay. Because people like me. Because I've already had it well established that I am not a fake. And I am not here to bring out fluff. And I'm not here to be somebody's emotional support porn pet. And I am not somebody's little affirmation junkie provider. I am here to be doing real work for people who have lives to live and want to apply that work in the lives that they can live. I'm not here to be their bodyguard or their therapist. But a lot of you guys who did are paying the price for the fact that you did in the first place. Now you know how to turn it around. Just a thought. Oh, that video went on a lot longer than I expected it to. I think I'm going to call it here. I've actually got a very cool talk coming up here very soon. I have reconnected with a couple of my witchy friends, Alora and Avalon, and we're going to be talking a bit more about how modern tarot and modern astrology, in terms of the internet, have created quite a stir. But we'll treat this video as an appetizer for that meal. It's going to be a fun little collab. Haven't done a collab in a while. I look forward to sharing that with you too. But for those of you who have any questions or heard anything you'd like me to expand upon more, please let me know. Because you know what? Touching on the talk of the market and, giving people a beat for what's going on, whether you are a business owner or you're thinking about starting one, or maybe you're just curious as a consumer and a viewer, I'd be curious as to what you think of this and what else you'd like to know. So y'all take care. I will see you all again soon. And if you would ever like to get a personal reading with me, head on over to my website. It's integrativemysticism.com.